Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today I'm going to take a look at 10 great songs on awful rock and metal albums. This is technically a part 2. I did part 1 of this series about 2 years ago on the channel, taking a look at some great songs on awful albums, and if you want to check it out, I'll leave it linked down below. I was rocking some really misguided mutton chops at the time, and was using a really unflattering camera angle too, so watch at your own risk, but we've come a long way since then, so I wanted to revise this topic here with 10 more. So with that being said, let's get started. These are in no particular order, but let's get started here. Coming in at number 10, I'm going to go with No Stranger to Love by Black Sabbath, featuring Tony Iommi from the 7th Star record here. And, you know, it's funny, because this is the exact kind of Sabbath song I wouldn't like. You know, Sabbath doing ballads never really was their thing, and, of course, by the mid-80s, just about every band had at least one ballad per album. You know, 7th Star is a real mixed bag of a record, originally intended to be a Tony Iommi solo project, and then, of course, they slapped the Sabbath name on it at the last minute, because the record label got cold feet. You know, that's why he's lonely on the cover here. But as a Sabbath album, it's pretty unfocused, and the burnout around this time period was real for Sabbath, especially Tony Iommi and Glenn Hughes, who fronted the band on lead vocals here, hitting rock bottom around this time period. The tour for this album was a mess. Glenn was struggling with, drug and alcohol abuse, and it was pretty bad around this time, so a lot of these songs really lacked that memorable quality to them. But that being said, I think No Stranger to Love is a fantastic ballad, and, again, should not like it, but I do. I think it's got some of the best vocals from Glenn Hughes on the record, and the best guitar solo by Tony Iommi as well. Sure, it's corny, right, by modern standards, but it's no cheesier than the rest of this album here, and beyond that, I really can't explain why I like this song. I just do. Tony doing something a bit different on what was supposed to be his solo debut. Just a real guilty pleasure earworm of a ballad from a very lost Black Sabbath record. Number 9, Modern Day Delilah from Sonic Boom by Kiss. I think Kiss's first proper studio album since 1998, Psycho Circus, had a lot of potential, but with the exception of the first song on this record, the magic was clearly gone, and the lineup of Gene and Paul with Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer did not have the same spark as past lineups did, and the band's attempt to make a classic-sounding Kiss record was all downhill from here. But that said, Modern Day Delilah packs such a punch as the album opener here. Love this song. It's catchy, got a great groove to it and riff. Paul even hits a high note that I'm sure took them about 20 different takes to finally get, but it's just a great song. First impressions of this album would be, oh my god, this is going to be a great Kiss album, but unfortunately the rest of this record is not nearly as good, and if you put together the best from Sonic Boom and Monster, you probably have one really solid modern Kiss record from the 21st century. But on both albums, I don't think anything tops Modern Day Delilah. You could put this song on any of those classic Kiss albums from the 70s, like a Love Gun or a Rock and Roll Over, and it wouldn't sound out of place at all. Following that up, I'm going to go with Inside Out by Anthrax, and this is, of course, from the Volume 8, The Threat is Real album, and after Stomp 442, Anthrax was really lost during the John Bush era, and the band pursued a groove and alternative metal sound on Volume 8 here, and the songs in this album are just bland and uninteresting, in my opinion, and it's mediocre Anthrax at best, but they still managed to churn out one of their best songs of the 90s with Inside Out, featuring Dimebag Darrell on guitar. This was the lead single for the record, and they also put out an EP surrounding this song that was released in Japan and the UK. And if Anthrax were going to go groove, Dimebag Darrell was the perfect guy to call up here to guest on this track, written by Bush, Scott Ian, and Charlie Benanti. And Scott Ian attributes this record's failures to the rise of nu metal at the same time, but I think the biggest issue here is the fact that the band were obviously in a slump. But I love Dime's playing on this track. I think it brings something fresh to the record that really helps it to stand out amongst this album of, otherwise 90s alternative thrash excrement. Next up, we have the title track to Dirty Diamonds by Alice Cooper. What a really forgettable and disappointing Alice Cooper album Dirty Diamonds was. I mean, a lot of the material on here feels like, joke tracks, and, Alice was barely taking this record seriously. It lacked the crunch or the heaviness of Brutal Planet, Dragontown, or The Eyes of Alice Cooper, and a lot of the material sounds like it would be a better fit on Zipper Catch a Skin or, Special Forces, but the one diamond in the rough, the Dirty Diamond in the rough, is the title track here, and really tight song here with an explosive and catchy chorus. I think it's very old school Alice Cooper, made to sound modern, but there's some really interesting callbacks on this track to, the 70s, to Muscle of Love, and lyrically, kind of sounds like, an old 70s crime drama with lyrics that could fit on the Man with the Golden Gun, or maybe Lace and Whiskey. Great, misguided album there, kind of middle of the road, but I do enjoy tracks on that record, even though it was a weird kind of period in history. I dig it a lot, though. I think there isn't much for me to talk about else on this record. This is the only song that I really enjoy here. You've got some really painful tracks to get through on this record that just again, would have been a better fit on the Blackout albums as far as I'm concerned. You know, I wish they would have included The Sharpest Pain on this record, a great deep cut from the Russian and UK promo CD releases, which is definitely worth checking out. Let's talk Deep Purple here with King of Dreams from the Slaves and Masters album. This is the best Rainbow song Deep Purple ever made, but, you know, seriously, Joe Lynn Turner is a good vocalist, but not a good fit for Deep Purple in my opinion. The band had fired Ian Gillan and brought in Joe, who previously worked with Richie Blackmore in Rainbow, and so it kind of made sense, right? Joe and Richie have chemistry together, but in execution, it's the worst Deep Purple album with, you know, completely unnecessary lineup change that wouldn't last for more than one record before Gillan was brought back. And the album is full of, you know, bland Purple Rainbow tracks, except for King of Dreams. Very catchy stuff. Love the chorus on that track. It's really bluesy in parts as well. Got a great melody. One of the more accessible songs in the band's 90s catalog, and honestly should have been a huge hit for them as far as I'm concerned. But a true diamond in the rough track here on an album that I just can't seem to get into otherwise. I mean, you know, Cut Runs Deep is okay. Fire in the Basement is alright, but I'm just not a fan of this record. And I love Deep Purple, and I like the Joe Lynn Turner era of Rainbow as well, but except for a few tracks on this album, it really never did anything for me. How about Our New World by Dream Theater from the Astonishing record from 2016? You know, it's not that there's not a single good song on the Astonishing. It's just that it's hard for anything to stand out on a bloated, overproduced concept album that absolutely should not be 2 hours long. Our New World is buried deep in the heart of Disc 2 of this thing, and it's the best this album has to offer, in my opinion. Great riff and chorus, beautiful guitar and bass lines, very catchy stuff, featuring Lizzie Hale of Hailstorm on guest vocals, and got a great John Petrucci guitar solo, which, you know, goes without saying. That's like saying the sky is blue, right? But definitely one of the more poppy songs on this record. However, I think it helps it to stand out, as far as I'm concerned. Coming up next, Public Enemy number 1 by Megadeth from 13, which was, you guessed it, the band's 13th studio album, and it's a real letdown of a record considering how great Endgame was, and this marked the return of bassist and total schivo David Ellefson for the first time since The World Needs a Hero, but just a really bland, forgettable album, and a lot of the spark and magic that was on Endgame was replaced by a complacent, boring record that was more simplistic than Endgame as well. And in terms of memorable tracks on here, you know, Sudden Death and Black Swan are alright, but this album, in my opinion, belongs to Public Enemy number 1, a modern Megadeth classic. The chorus is an earworm with, you know, great guitar work. Love the riff under Chris Broderick's solo, and even the rhythm, you know, parts, even the rhythm riffs are interesting here and engaging, and it's not, you know, this scorching thrasher of a track, but still tons of fun to listen to. Number 3, let's go with Under Pressure by Queen from Hot Space. The band went full-on dance rock, incorporating elements of disco, funk, and new wave on that record, and I give them credit for branching out. You know, Queen were never afraid to take chances in the studio, and especially doing this during the height of the whole disco sucks thing, but sometimes these things just don't work out. I think Hot Space is a prime example of that. One of my least favorite Queen records, mostly composed of bland songs and or really cringeworthy and dated dance rock tracks. I think Life is Real is a nice tribute to John Lennon, and I always thought Body Language was way overrated, but hands down the best song on this record is the one that I've heard to death a million times on classic rock radio, and that's Under Pressure, their collaboration with David Bowie, and super recognizable by that amazing bass line by John Deacon, and David Bowie and Freddie Mercury's vocals together sound awesome. Wish we would have gotten more, you know, from Bowie working with Queen, but it's a great duet here with by far the most staying power on this album, and thankfully Queen would scale down the whole dance rock thing and move to a more return to form with The Works in 1984, but I'd say from that era, from the Hot Space era, there's a lot of hit or miss. I'm not a fan of a lot of the material on that album, but hands down Under Pressure, not just one of the best collaborations in rock history, but one of the best songs in the Queen catalog. Nostradamus, the title track by Judas Priest here from this bloated record, and just like I was talking about with Our New World, Nostradamus is another diamond in the rough track amidst an inexcusably long concept album, and the record itself is just uninteresting. You know, I can appreciate what Priest were going for here, but the whole premise is very Spinal Tap-ish, and, you know, with the exception of the title track and Death, it's just one unremarkable song after another on, you know, this plodding concept album to follow up Angel of Retribution. The title track is far and away the best song on this record, and, you know, I think it proves that Priest had good material here, but just not enough to justify a double album. Halford's vocals pack a real punch in the chorus, and Halford hits an insane high note when the guitars kick in after the intro. This song gives me real Hammer and the Anvil vibes, between the Hammer and the Anvil from Painkiller. I think this definitely would have fit on the Painkiller album, and I love how pronounced Ian Hill's bass is, too. Great cut from an album that, you know, even Nostradamus himself could not have predicted would have been so bad and would have been such a flop, but the title track is pretty good. And last but not least here, we have Gemini by Slayer, and maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but I could never get into Undisputed Attitude, and I just was never a fan of Slayer covering hardcore and punk. I think a lot of the covers on here are poorly made, and any attempts to, Slayerify them didn't come out well. I mean, listen to I'm Gonna Be Your God to see what I'm talking about. So it makes sense that far and away the best song for me on this record has to be Gemini, the only original track on the album, right? Really killer album closer here, written by Kerry King and Tom Araya. Kicks off with a sludgy and doomy intro before transitioning into a more traditional Slayer track. And what's also really interesting is to listen to how this track foreshadows the direction the band will be going in next on Diabolus and Musica. And I know Jeff Hanneman was, really into this project, but a lot of these covers just fall flat for me, which, it makes sense why I'd enjoy the only original track, which stands out amongst a sea of misguided covers for me. So that wraps up this video here, taking a look at 10 great rock and metal songs from terrible albums. You can see my picks right over here. If you want to check out part 1, I'll leave it linked down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload, and let me know down in the comment section what are your thoughts on my picks and what are some of your favorite songs from terrible rock and metal albums. I want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.